Administration table will appear on camera. Last, we ask that you please turn your cell phones on silent. Got that, Greg? Thanks. All right. All right. And Councillor Graham, can you hear? All right. If you're wanting to speak, I want you to stand up, turn around, and wave your hat in the air. Yeah, that'll get my attention. Okay. All right. We are live streaming now. Oh, all right then. Good morning, everyone. I call this special meeting of council to order. All of us border services are ready to receive you and allow you to enter into Canmore. Please proceed in an orderly manner with your passport and travel papers. But first, in the spirit of reciprocity and truth, we honor and acknowledge the Canmore area, known as Shooting at Willows in Stoney Nakoda, and the traditional Treaty 7 territory and oral practices of the Stoney Nakoda, comprised of the Bears Spa First Nation, Chiniki First Nation, and Wesley First Nation, as well as Tsuut'ina First Nation and Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai. We acknowledge that this territory is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3, within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. We acknowledge all nations who live, work, play, and help us steward this land and who honor and celebrate this territory. And of course, this acknowledgement accomplishes very little on its own, and without actions, these are mere words. Accordingly, the town of Canmore continues in its commitment to working to live in right relations with Indigenous neighbours and all people, and to advance truth and reconciliation. Now moving to the agenda, would like to add an in-camera item, the new TSMVPL statement of claims, or statements of claim. Are there any other adjustments to the agenda? Yes.
Yes, if you could hear item H1 before the items under G.
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so with that addition and recognizing that we're going to be doing H before G, I'll move that we approve the agenda as amended. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. So now we will move to item H1, the 2022 budget. Oh, is that what we're doing today? Yeah.
You might be having deja vu. We've talked about this a lot, but today's the last day.
Did you just want to note before you begin that Cochrane has double digits tax increase? No? Okay. All right.
I think they've had a tricky process from what we've been hearing. So good morning. Before I get into the presentation, I just wanted to walk through the related attachments. So there were 5 separate attachments to the budget approval agenda item. The first is a copy of the 2019 to 2022 Council Strategic Plan, as the budget is linked to our strategic plan. The second is the summary of both the operating and capital budgets, which has written summaries and charts highlighting the most significant changes. The third attachment provides the detail, that's kind of the meat of the budget, that shows our town, division, and department budget pages. The fourth attachment includes the charts summarizing the capital budget information, including the debt charts. And the fifth and final attachment includes the detailed capital budget summaries and all the individual capital project sheets. No? There we go. So there are 4 motions. These are the decisions that Council is asked to consider today. First, that Council approve the 2022 operating budget as presented. The Council adopt the 23 and 24 operating plans, those 2 remaining years in the 3-year, as presented. The Council approve the 2022 capital budget and then adopt the 23 to 26 capital plan. So this is the agenda for today's meeting. First, I'll quickly go through the Finance Committee decision-making process and various considerations as you went through your deliberations. Then secondly, the budget's alignment to goals and priorities, and finally a high-level overview of operating and capital budgets. And as we've gone through this all before with the Finance Committee, I'm going to keep this presentation this morning quite brief. So first, the decision-making process of the Finance Committee. The objective of the committee is to demonstrate fiscal responsibility in a transparent and public manner, and clearly did that, having spent over 22 hours just in meetings reviewing operating and capital plans and making several amendments you directed administration to bring back to Council for approval today as part of the budget. In addition to the hours of meetings reviewing the budget, each councillor spent a significant amount of time reviewing the budget materials, and administration also spent significant time preparing, reviewing, and presenting these budget materials. So our presentation today will focus on the details of that final budget for approval. As a reminder, this budget was prepared using a number of tools through which Council gives administration clear direction. That includes Council-approved policies and master plans approved by Council, which provide a further framework. Most of the work of the municipality is the programs and services which are either legislated or have been previously approved by Council. In terms of strategic alignment, Council's priorities guide the budget process. The capital project for the construction of the new fire hall has been included in 2022 with the additional costs related to near carbon neutral construction. Paid parking is planned to expand to downtown, and a portion of the revenues are transferred to fund the loss of fare revenue for local transit as well as service increases. The increased maintenance and accessibility of outdoor amenity space was accomplished throughout 2021, and 2022 onwards represents a return to the previous levels of maintenance and accessibility. One of the priorities within the Solid Waste Services Department is the growth of the commercial food waste program. And last but not least, the Tourism Task Force was established and a framework was adopted by Council on October 5th of this year, and there is also continued contribution to TCK each year. Sorry, the spacing looks a little funny on here. Now to get into the operating budget and some specific budget pressures and offsets and mitigation strategies. So there are a number of increases outside of our control. As Council may recall, as Finance Committee, when we looked at increases greater than 10,000, 86% of those increases in 2022 are uncontrollable and are related to things like inflation, pre-existing contracts and priorities, or are growth related. Major pressures on 2022 include RCMP contract cost increases, increased fire staffing, required repairs and maintenance, and reintroduction of critical services that were reduced during COVID-19, as well as some priority staffing additions. Due to the constraints in the budget direction that was originally at 5%, not all reintroductions were possible, particularly when we get into the reserve contributions. So speaking next to 2 of those items specifically, the RCMP contract costs as well as fire related costs, both the fire hall's debt impacts and staffing. So we went through an illustrative example of using the tax stabilization reserve for a smoothing effect. So I just wanted to run through this quickly one more time. So our example here is conservative in that we're assuming no contributions because those do come from one-time transfers and one-time unbudgeted sources of revenue, which at this time we don't plan for. So again, those major cost factors, so the census was conducted this year. We're expecting that will show a result for Canmore that will result in our cost share for the RCMP increasing to 90%. And we've also included some estimates for pay raises from the collective agreement for those future years. There's also the 6-year fire staffing phase-in that we've been working through, so we also have the plan for that. And with the potential capital project for construction of the fire hall in 2022, that debt servicing costs would come online in 2023. So with those factors, if we were not using the tax stabilization reserve for 2022, we would have been looking at a 7.3% tax increase given everything that we know and given the magnitude of those factors. But again, here's where we can see when we add in the 600,000, as well as the other 54 pertains to the Safe Park program that is kind of the continuation of the pilot. But the 600,000 relates to these items, and that's what brings us down to the 5.1%. So those, without using the tax stabilization reserve to mitigate primarily those two large significant factors, we would have been in a very different position. So as a high-level overview, so this is page 3 of the third attachment. For 2022, the total budget is $61.5 million. Non-tax revenues are identified at $33.4 million. Non-tax revenue, you'll note, is slightly higher than our tax revenue, and that's fees, fines, other revenues. Revenue from taxes is then required at $28.1 million. Growth has been identified at $400,000 in taxes for each of the 3 years of the plan. And so then revenue from taxes net of growth is at 5.1%. Otherwise, you'll see 6.6% increases in taxes without consideration for that growth in our tax base. So as a reminder, it's 5.1% for 2022, and the plan includes tax increases net of growth at 6.2% in 2023 and 5.8% in 2024. So as a reminder, the impact of this tax increase, so we've shown it 3 different ways here. The first per $100,000 of assessed value, and then 2 sample households on the residential side, one at $700,000 and one at $1 million. And we've shown the total increase both per year and per month. So for each $100,000 of assessment, the total increase per month is roughly $1. So for a sample household at $700,000, that increase per month would be $7. Or at $1 million, again, it just compounds by that factor to $10 per month. On the non-residential side, again, given the broad spectrum of assessed values on that non-residential side, we've shown the increase per 100,000 of assessment. So on the non-residential side, that's a total increase of about $3 per month. So that was all I was going to cover on the operating side. Moving on to capital. There are a large number of considerations that go into the preparation of the capital budget, including policies, again, those strategic alignment factors I went through earlier, our funding envelope, grant availability, and the assets we need to maintain, looking at things through that asset management lens. I believe we have the funding envelope and capacity to deliver on these projects. But again, with the impacts of COVID on some of our reserve contributions, at the end of this 5-year window, we're not contributing too much beyond this time frame. Again, as a reminder, the capital budget identifies the assets to be acquired and the required funding to do so. It's our action plan for the upcoming period of what assets are needed and how they'll be funded, whether that's through grants, operating capital, capital reserves, or debt financing. And just as a reminder, as you would have seen, it's not just physical, tangible capital assets we include in our capital budget, like building improvements or vehicles, but also things like studies or plans that have a multi-year benefit. So this is a summary of capital expenditure for the 5-year planning period, 2022 to 2026, and shows the level of capital expenditure by year. 2022 includes that $14.65 million for the new fire hall construction. 2023 is actually the biggest year of expenditures and includes $10.5 million for the Pump House 2 treatment capacity upgrade construction. So based on those projects, this is how reserve and debt levels will be impacted by delivering this capital plan. So dropping off next year with some of those significant projects in 22 and 23, and then gradually building up a little bit more. So debt levels increase annually as our revenue increases annually. So our debt limit, as a reminder again, is a multiplier on our revenue. So the red line is the MGA allowable level of debt, and the black line is the allowable level of debt per council's debt policy at 70% of that MGA limit. So throughout this horizon, we stay below the self-imposed debt limit as well below the MGA allowable level. And then it's similar on the debt servicing side. Again, with interest rates having been low for the last period, we are well below the debt servicing side of things. Again, the red line is the MGA limit, and the black line is our internal imposed limit. So I won't go through all the projects. So again, these respond to council strategic priorities and community priorities and will impact administration's capacity as we deliver on this work. But some of the major projects in 2022 include the new fire station construction, again for $14.65 million, the Bow River West Pathway Phase 1 for $1.5 million, the Old Canmore Road water upgrade for $1.025 million, some street and drainage rehabilitation for $1 million, and the Lions Park Tennis Court expansion construction for $750,000. And again, many more projects than that. These are just some of the most material from a dollar value perspective. And so in conclusion, there are a couple of final steps that happen after the budget approval today. So we do add those project numbers, so those unique 4-digit numbers that we'll then be referencing throughout 2022. So those get assigned once the budget is final and approved by you today, and then following any final changes from deliberation today, once those project numbers are final, this all gets cleaned up, and then there's a final budget package that will be publicly available on the website. So there is a little bit of work to do after the approval today. And that concludes my presentation on the budget this morning. So again, these are the 4 motions in front of council at this time, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Richardson, and thank you for all of the work and the many hours of presentations that that we've experienced together. I'll now open it up to any questions from council. It appears that we used our time very well during the Finance Committee meetings. And so thank you very much. I don't see any questions. Great. So then I'll put the first motion on the table, that council approve the 2022 operating budget as presented. Any discussion on that motion? I'll speak to the motion, indicating that I think we can see from what other municipalities are experiencing, and we certainly are not immune to that, that this is a tough budget year. There's been a lot of pressures on the budget out of our control, as we have heard. I think that administration and the Finance Committee has done a good job of keeping it within a moderate increase compared to what others are experiencing. And I think that what we are also recognizing is that when you go the route of a 0% increase, despite the fact that there's inflationary forces at work all the time, eventually you have to pay that cost. And we are seeing that in the pressures on budgets. COVID has been hard right across the board, and I certainly applaud the efforts of past councils in trying to alleviate the pain that is experienced on a variety of fronts. However, we might take away from this that it just delays the increase, and it actually compounds. So I'll definitely support this operating budget as presented. Councillor Faubert.
All right. I'm not just going to vote to spend $60+ million without giving a speech. There is something that I like to keep in mind in politics and in life, and it might be familiar for people, and I think it's appropriate for this budget, and it's the serenity prayer. And it's, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And when it comes to circumstances beyond our control and recognizing those in the budget, I think it's really important that not only we do that as elected officials, but our community as well. There's a lot of pressure on us to stick to inflation. Like, inflation's the only thing that happens in the world. And, you know, our community is, and our operations of our municipality isn't just like a Ronco rotisserie. You don't just set it and forget it, and then it just goes up by a preset amount. There are things that we are dealing with that we didn't even know we would have to be dealing with even a month ago in this budget. So we have to, when we do this work, create the conditions for success for administration to go out and deliver what it is that we do for the community. And what I see in this budget is that meeting those conditions of excellence, because I think that we run a pretty tight ship and we do a really good job. And I'm very proud of the town of Canmore. I'm proud of the budget work that we have done as our first outing as council, newly elected. It's super exciting. And there's lots in this budget, I think, to get excited about. I know COVID is still kind of hanging over us, but there's some pretty cool things. The commercial food waste program, food truck pilots program, that's awesome. I know a lot of people who are going to be jazzed about that. We are getting into better planning. We're, increasing our planning abilities for the community. We're looking at the downtown, something that was really big in the election, something that we've always kind of put off as council, and now we're ready to do that. And, we've maintained, I think, our social supports, and things that I don't think the community necessarily recognizes, which is additional funds for FCSS and for the Family Resource Network, above and beyond what we're required to fund for these services in our community, because we want to meet those needs of the people who live here. So with 86% of this modest 5% increase, which is only on half of your total bill, 86% of that being beyond our control, we've done a great job. Thank you.
Councillor McCallum.
That's a tough act to follow. So this is, I think, my 11th budget, maybe 12th, doesn't matter. Every time we do this, I learn something new about our organization, and I'm always amazed at the services that we provide. In 2020, when council decided to freeze taxes, we really knew that there was a 50% chance that we were doing the wrong thing. We had no idea, absolutely none. And what was happening in the world, and I hate this word now, but it was unprecedented. We've never seen anything like this, and municipalities left to really sort of manage the human side of it all on a face-to-face basis. So I am proud of our previous budgets, knowing that we knew nothing at that moment. But I am proud of the recovery that we're seeing in this budget, in particular addressing things that sort of were put on pause due to COVID in some ways, in terms of housing, in terms of planning for our downtown, and more importantly, ensuring that when we build that beautiful, functional new fire hall, that we have the staff to be able to fill it, not instantly, but definitely in a sustainable manner that we can afford. And so I am happy to support this budget. I know that other municipalities are struggling in the same way we are. Our neighbor down the road just approved a 10% tax increase last night. That must have been tough for those elected officials. So to wrap it all up, I'll be supporting this budget, and I am happy to see what we see in the future budgets, and we'll just take them one year at a time like we always do. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Moving to the second motion, that council adopt the 2023-2024 operating plans as presented. And speaking to that motion, I certainly will support these operating plans. And that's what they are, is their plans. They give guidance so that projects can be moving forward and not start-stop waiting for budget approvals year after year. However, we do refine the budget at this time next year, and we will be providing administration direction in the first half of 2022 as to what we expect for the 2023 budget. And so that's important to note that those numbers are not set in stone, but they certainly are the direction that we're heading. Any other discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Moving to the third motion, that Council approve the 2022 capital budget as presented. And before we get into any discussion or debate, I would like to move an amending motion. Ms. Hyde will put that on the screen for us. This amending motion is that Council direct administration to create a $100,000 capital project to undertake a study in 2022, assessing the best location for a passenger rail station in Canmore, as well as the impact of the proposed Calgary to Banff passenger rail project on the municipality's transportation systems, which would be funded from the General Municipal Capital Reserve, and to return to Council with the full scope of the study for approval prior to implementation. So very recently we've received, or there was a release that the Banff Calgary passenger rail project is moving to the design phase, which is the last phase before construction. That's not to say that it's completely a green light for that project. There is still an application with the government of Alberta that is being reviewed at present. However, if we are going to be ready, we do need to take, at least I believe, this step in order to be part of the process should it get a green light, so that we can determine if and where there would be a stop in Canmore and what other systems would be impacted by the railway, whether that be some congestion due to additional trains, public transit, connectivity, etc. So I'd ask you to consider supporting this motion. Looking to any discussion on the motion. Councillor McCallum?
Question for you, Your Worship. When you're speaking of transportation systems, are you thinking just vehicle, or are you thinking of all modes?
All modes.
Okay, perfect.
I'm thinking walking, biking, vehicles, public transit, all of them.
Yeah. So I believe it was in early 2020, Council, the mayor, rather, of the day, wrote to the minister, and this is one of the questions that they had with regards to what passenger rail would look like. There's also a series of other questions that were in that letter that have never really been addressed by the proponents. And I'm wondering if there will be at any point a budget ask to address those questions in addition to this. This one is the front and center, I understand that, but the others are of equal importance. And I'm wondering if you've put any thought at all into how those might be addressed in the future.
Yeah, great question. I think that this is somewhat of an organic process in that it's developing before our eyes. And Canmore has actually no say on whether passenger rail takes place between Banff and Calgary. So in some ways, we're responding to something that is beyond our control. So with this information and other information that develops over time, I suspect that there will be decisions that we'll have to make as to what level of service around passenger rail that we would be funding, what would be coming with the project, and a host of other questions that we don't even know yet.
Yeah, and I guess I'm not inferring through this question that, about choice of rail, whether it comes through or not. I think I would just rather ask the questions, even if they're questions internal to us, so that we can start preparing for the answers or what the answer might hold. So I'm happy to support this motion. I'm glad you brought it forward. I know that we've been batting it back and forth since the announcement. It's just, I know that, and we're seeing it in our inbox. There are other questions the community has in addition to this that, and I just wanted to know if at any point we thought we might come forward with another budget ask to address some of those questions and concerns and maybe do some modeling, et cetera. But I will wait to a future date.
Thank you. Councillor Faubert.
Here's a perfect example of circumstances occurring that we have to adjust for and create a plan for an uncertain future, both operationally and capitally, potentially. I think we need to add this to the capital budget this year. We don't want to be left behind when it comes to the Banff-Calgary rail proposal, but I'm excited, but I have a lot of curiosity, and I really am excited to find out things like how this will reduce greenhouse gas emissions, how this will benefit Albertans, how it will reduce congestion, how it will potentially fit into our community and benefit our community, how we might mitigate and work together with the other parties on this for some of the unintended or the clearly not unintended consequences. Another 10 trains through our town will cause traffic chaos. So, you know, we got to be thinking about this. So I will support this, and I would hope that the proponents and the fact that this is kind of taking a different P3 approach, as I understand it, you know, are open to speaking and meeting with us and having this dialogue where we get to talk about these things. And there's a lot that still has to happen. Even the press release and on all the media coverage last week didn't even mention the multiple environmental impact assessments statements that would have to occur. It's not just going through a national park, it's going through a provincial parks, the Stoney Nakoda Reservation. So it's a lot of work to do, and I think this is a signal that Canmore is at the table and wants to do that work, and I look forward to more information.
Ditto. No, just kidding. Yeah, thank you for bringing this motion forward. I think it is important work that needs to be done, because again, it's either going to be we prepare or it'll just pass us by and we'll be stuck with whatever we get stuck with. So I think it's important for us to do the work to try to mitigate some of those concerns and to just to start looking into how this is going to affect our community. So I will support this motion, as I think we kind of have to at this point.
Thank you, Mayor Kraussort, for bringing this forward. I too will support this motion. I know that in our, as Councillor McCallum said, our inbox is filling up with many of the questions that Councillor Faubert has just stated, and I think it's better to be ahead of the ball instead of being rolled over by the ball. So this will help us have the information ahead of time and get ready to prepare if it should go through. So I'm happy to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Kraussort. I think the spirit of this makes a lot of sense. This is a question I'm a little bit, if I could get a little bit of clarity on. If we were to pass this, okay, and there comes a situation where perhaps, say, the province kicks it down the road and says, actually, we're not in favor of moving this project forward, what is our recourse with this project? Is there a way we can fund the monies into a different way, or have this project, this study, still find ways to derive value, even if a train station does not happen, or the project itself doesn't happen? Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, that's a very good question. There's, no guarantees, right? And, as far as even the scope of this, administration's going to, if this is passed, spend some time, and I expect to get some input from an expert to define the scope and come back to us with that. And we will hopefully have information that is not too limited in its shelf life, so that should the project be either delayed or come back in a different form at another time, we'll be
We can derive
ahead of the game at that point for the future. But it's an excellent question.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. With that in mind and the ability to derive value from this project, even if there is a scope change, I support this.
Councillor Ma. Councillor Graham, I don't know if you would want to say anything or not.
Yes, please.
Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, I will echo many of the statements made by my fellow councillors. I have a lot of questions and a lot of curiosity as to what this project may and the impacts it may have on our community. I have two questions, and kind of similar to Councillor Ma's. This project certainly isn't a guarantee. And I wonder if this motion is a little bit premature and we might subject it to other bodies such as the province supporting this project and not spending this money prematurely. There are environmental impact statements and all sorts of things that need to be answered first. Would it be prudent to subject this money to seeing a few other check boxes happen first? And then my second question is just the amount. I'm wondering how you came to 100,000 and what that might look like.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. I'll speak to those questions. First of all, this money is not going to be spent on January 1st. We're going to have admin come back and provide us with a scope before implementation. And so there is going to be a natural delay there, during which other things may happen, including hearing from the province. Keeping in mind a couple of things. One is that the province is being asked to pay after it's built. There are actually, there may be other recourse available to the proponents. I don't know. But I don't know if it's all waiting on the province, and their review, I believe, is supposed to be done in the foreseeable future. It's not supposed to be months. It's just in the next month or two, is my understanding. So I don't know if waiting on those helps us or just puts us potentially behind and then having to catch up even more. As far as the amount, it's really a placeholder. We'll get a sense from the scope if it's too much or not enough. In speaking with CAO, we determined that that's a good placeholder amount, and we will respond to that when we have better information.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you. I just wanted to, at the time of asking my question about modes, I wanted to make sure that Rome was going to be involved in that as well. Is that what you consider as part of the scope of this project?
Absolutely.
Or yeah, because that's a key in my mind as well. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I realized wasn't specific in using that, and I wanted to make sure that I wasn't surprised after the fact.
That's what I meant by public transit when I answered earlier.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be key wherever the stop is that there's connections. And a variety of connections, and public transit is one of the most important of those connections.
Thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Faubert. Okay. Any other discussion on the amending motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. So now we're returning to the main motion that council approve the 2022 capital budget as amended. Is there any discussion with respect to this motion? I would just like to echo some of the comments made earlier, especially by councillors McCallum and Faubert, that this capital budget represents getting some really important work done, such as the fire hall and some of our design work for roadways, etc. But it also includes capital projects for downtown planning and the planning in Palliser, which supports increased affordable housing. And I'm very excited that we were able to do that, mostly because we were freed up from the cost of the RCMP detachment renovations, which allowed some of those capital funds to be used towards these projects and still being a benefit to us after the renovation project was canceled. Any other discussion on the motion? Councillor Faubert?
My mic is being weird, and I believe it's because I hit the button when I wasn't supposed to at some point. Thank you, Your Worship. I'm speaking in favor of the motion for this $26 million capital budget. That's a big number, and it can be daunting, and I think especially as a newly elected official on council, it can seem, whoa, like what, how much are we spending? But when you actually drill down into the details, there is so much being accomplished for our community, and all the projects that support our community, meet our community values, go after our strategic priorities as council. And I'm excited about the service level review. I think is going to be such hard work. And I'm excited for it. And the new fire hall, that's like the majority of this entire capital plan. And I think that we need to keep that in mind, is that when we are spending this money on these types of projects for our community, there are all kinds of objectives and outcomes and goals and values that we're putting at play. And I'm very proud that this last council decided to meet climate change objectives with this new fire hall. That's huge, and expect the awards to be rolling in afterwards, because this is a big play. We're flexing for sure. Like, the future delivery of what we do in terms of climate change, is important, and I know because we get a lot of emails from the climate change people. But we've also declared this, a crisis. This is something we're concerned about. So, taking that approach on this project, I think, wears our heart on our sleeves. So, with that, I will not press the button and stop talking.
Councillor Ma.
Yeah, also as a first-time counselor, these are big numbers, and they're big numbers to wrap around. I echo a lot of sentiments that Councillor Faubert says about the fire hall, and I just look at the fire hall as a dry run for the next big spend, the pump house. Get ready.
Seeing no further discussion, I will call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And moving to the final motion under the 2022 budget is the council adopt the 2023 to 2026 capital plans as presented. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you, everyone. We now have a budget, and so now we can go towards the bylaws that help implement it. And so we'll now move to item G1, the borrowing bylaw 2021-29 and borrowing bylaw amendment 2021-30. Ms. Richardson.
Sorry, I had the agenda wrong in my head. I thought we were doing Andreas's piece first. Give me 1 minute, I'll grab my slides.
Did you want to flip them around? It doesn't. No? Okay, all right. Proceed.
Does it matter for yours? No. Okay. So next up are the two borrowing bylaws for the two 2022 approved capital projects with debentures as a financing source. Still can't get that to work. So our recommendations are as follows. The council give first reading to borrowing bylaw 2021-29, new fire station construction, and the council give first reading to borrowing bylaw amendment 2021-30, water main connection upgrade, Old Canmore Road. So first up is the borrowing bylaw for the new fire station. So again, as mentioned in the last agenda item, this is for the new fire station. So the construction of a new near carbon neutral 8-bay fire station at the north corner of Palliser Trail and Benchlands Trail intersection, and that's to replace our existing facility. The total cost for this project is $14.65 million, 7 of which is intended to be taken into debenture, which is what the borrowing bylaw is for. The remaining funding comes from MSI for $6 million, general capital reserve for $600,000, and then an other non-government grant for $1.05 million. So historically, the town has done most of its borrowing through what was previously the Alberta Capital Financing Authority. That's now been kind of rolled into the Treasury branch, and so we're able to access low-interest loans through the province in order to support our capital project needs. For the fire station, we actually have been exploring a different route, accessing the Green Municipal Fund, which is through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and applies to projects like the fire station that have with our near carbon neutral construction, we're eligible for this program. So the non-government grant is specifically related to that program and is tied to the amount of the debenture we're taking. And so in the borrowing bylaw itself, we'll see references to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities or another qualified lending institution if we choose to go that way. But this is the option we're currently exploring, and that is new for us. And then we have the amendment 2021-30 for the water main connection upgrade at Old Canmore Road. So this is for the completion of the water upgrade and connection along Old Canmore Road. That was originally planned in 2021 as part of the TIP 20 work. But when we actually received the bids during the 2021 tendering process, our project budget was insufficient. So the chart on the left shows our original borrowing bylaw with debentures at $130,000 and a total project cost of $500,000. With the new amendment, the debentures would be $266,500, and the total project cost is up to $1.025 million. So I think, my apologies, in the red line version, I think there might have been some discrepancies with the numbers, if that's correct, Ms. Hyde, but I believe the bylaw amendment itself had the correct numbers. And one of them, I do apologize, these borrowing bylaws have, they're quite structured, and so I always use old templates, and I missed a reference to Mayor Borman. My apologies, Mayor Krausert. As I'm updating all my templates, I caught it on one, missed it on one, so my apologies for that. So these are the financial impacts of the two projects. So the new fire station debt is planned for a term of 20 years, whereas the water main connection upgrade is a term of 15 years. So that's why the two current rates are slightly different because of the different terms of the loans. So for the new fire station, the total interest at the current rate would be roughly $2.6 million, and the semi-annual payments at the current rate would be $239,000. And the borrowing bylaw, it also specifies the maximum amount, so the maximum amount is currently set at 7%, consistent with what we've used in previous years. So at that scenario, which again we're not planning for but is accounted for in the borrowing bylaw, total interest would go up to $6.1 million, and semi-annual payments would increase to $328,000. Similarly, for the water main connection upgrade, total interest would be $68,000 at the current indicative rate, at 7%, $168,000. Semi-annual payments at $11,000 and potentially $14,000 at that maximum rate. Doesn't necessarily impact these two projects, but I did want to mention one other new piece of information that we've recently received as it pertains to the affordability of our borrowing going forward. So Mr. Irwin and myself are on a mailing list as we handle the borrowing for the town, and we recently received communication that for debt that we're taking through the province, they will no longer be offering the same below market rates that they've historically offered to municipalities, that they are no longer able to afford those low interest loans. And so we're already seeing that the indicative rates we're receiving have gone up, I believe 0.5 to 0.75% for all future borrowing. Which again is a direct cost to us for projects that we're taking debt on. And again, I wasn't aware that this was at all in the works until we recently received this email, and it will affect all of our debt going forward. So specifically, the new fire station construction, as mentioned, we're looking at doing that borrowing through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, so won't directly impact this project since we aren't going directly through the province. And the water main connection, we do build in a little bit of a buffer with our interest rate, so not recommending any changes to the borrowing that's in front of council at this time, but was new information I wanted to share with regards to the affordability of our projects longer term, that we will, even if we access financing through the province, the interest rates won't be as favorable as we have been receiving, and that'll be a direct cost to us. We'll look at other options now. Historically, that has been the best option, but might also be worth reaching out now to some of our financial institution partners and seeing what that market looks like now.
Thank you for that.
So just to wrap this up, as a reminder, we saw these in the last
Mr.
presentation.
Councillor Graham?
Sorry, it's really awkward this way. Can you just clarify for me, the interest or the debt structure that we're taking is fixed or variable rate debt?
Fixed.
Fixed.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
So whether through the province or through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, I believe that's one of the advantages. It's fixed for the duration of the term of the loan. We're not subject to market variability.
Okay, thanks. And Councillor McCallum?
Thank you. And all of our loans are fixed, and we can't really prepay a balance and get a benefit from that at all.
No, and specifically with the, just for council's information, specifically with the Federation, with the FCM Green Municipal Fund program, with the uncertainty about what to do with the existing fire station, with previous council, we had explored options around whatever happens with that, with our existing station, should we choose to use any of that money to prepay or pay down the debt early. There's pros and cons with these programs. The benefits are that we have these fixed interest rate terms. The downside is those types of prepayments or earlier paying off of the loans often comes with steep penalties. So again, we could use it to pay down other older debt or different things, but we couldn't likely earmark it to these specific new debts.
I believe at the time, the understanding, I think that the thinking was that you sold the old fire hall and that then you would have a reduced amount that you would end up loaning or borrowing rather. Just a few questions about the FCM loan. So is it obviously will still affect our borrowing percentages, right?
Correct.
And are the rates more competitive than what we're getting through the province and or ATB?
So because of this grant portion,
Right.
The interest rate is, I can't remember what it ends up being, but if we look at the effective rate of the debenture and that grant portion, it is more favorable than we receive even through the low-interest program
Excellent.
through the
Perfect.
province.
And then with regards to the email that you received, based on the, you said it was like a 0.5%, 0.75% that we were receiving in discount. Basically, that's putting us on par with the Big Five in terms of what they can lend us now, correct? Like that government discount that exists always, that's basically what's disappearing. Basically, the provincial government's making money on the backs of municipalities.
Yeah, the advantage we've received from going through the province, I believe, will be likely minimized going forward with this change. So we would need to specifically look at some of the projects and what they're able to offer on fixed terms of some of these durations. And so this was all just new information to us.
Yeah,
with
of
no
course.
conditioning basically this week. So looking forward, we'll have to do some of that analysis, but I believe that will change the landscape for us and make going through traditional financial institutions a more viable option than it has been historically with how much cheaper it was through the province.
Great, thank you so much.
And just before you continue with your presentation, Councillor Faubert.
Oh, yeah, I was just curious, through what government department is it municipal affairs that we borrow money from?
I think it's the Treasury branch.
The Treasury branch?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then was there it's just effective immediately, no warning? Boom, like you don't get access to this benefit you've had before. Okay.
Yeah, for all the indicative rates we're looking at going forward, I believe they're now already reflecting that change.
And this doesn't necessarily affect 2022, but 23, 24?
So that's what we'll have to look at is for now interest rates going forward, that kind of max cap where we've historically built in a little bit of a contingency with our planning. Now that probably isn't, there's no room there anymore, so we'll likely need to revisit our interest rates going forward, which will affect the utility models where we do take a significant amount of debt, particularly for our offsite and growth-related projects. So again, no plans changed for this time, but we will need to look at all of it, particularly the utility side going forward.
Thank you. Please proceed.
So I can't remember if I spoke to this one or not, but we've looked at this before. Again, just a reminder that we are below our internal and external debt limits. So here are the timelines. It does take a little while for these borrowing bylaws to become effective. So we're doing first reading today, December 14th. Our plan is to advertise it already this week, so on the 16th and the 23rd. The 15-day petition period deadline will then happen on January 7th. Well, our plan is to then have second and third readings at the regular business meeting in January, so that will be the 11th. And then if no application is made to the Court of Queen's Bench, we have a valid bylaw 30 days later on February 10th. And again, sorry, I was rushing. In the package, I believe we still had an April 1st date, but it actually is February 10th. Historically, we get budget approval in December, and we usually do the borrowing bylaws at the first business meeting in January. However, given the magnitude of the fire hall project and the need to get that tendering process underway, we are doing this much earlier than we normally do.
Great.
And so that concludes my presentation, unless there are any questions on either of these bylaws.
Councillor Hillstead.
Thank you for your presentation. So within the bylaw 2021-04 for the Old Canmore Road, there was the one under the water utility reserve, the one number didn't change. When we made the total cost higher, that number stayed the same. Do we need to change that now, or can that be changed? Should that be changed later? Just under, whereas the council of the town of Canmore estimates the following contributions will apply to the project: water utility reserve, $370,000, debenture, $266,500, and the total cost $1,025,000. 370 plus 266 is a little different number. So should that number be changed now, or?
And sorry, was that in the red line version
Yeah.
or the actual amendment itself?
It's in the red line for sure. I don't.
So So I
Because the
think,
amendment, that's the thing, the amendment speaks just to the striking out of, like, substituting the debt limit numbers. It doesn't talk about the water utility reserve, so that's why I'm curious if that needs to change now, or if that's just a typographical error at this point and just needs to be corrected anytime. Okay. Thanks.
Yep, thanks for noticing that, Councillor Hillstead. Any other questions? Councillor Graham?
I'm wondering about the advertising of the bylaw just the timing of it over Christmas. Many people are going to be away. Just any consideration to the timing of that advertising going that we're into the holiday season?
so we're required to advertise it for 2 weeks, so it will be in this week's paper, and it would only kind of be that second week that's kind of getting that close to Christmas. So hopefully with that whole 14-day window and 2 issues of the paper, we are hoping that people who would choose to take note of that, I guess, would note it with that period. It is close to the holidays, and it is different than our usual timeframes when we usually bring these things forward in January. But again, with the urgency around getting the fire hall underway and not losing this construction year, that was one of the reasons we've expedited the process as much as we have.
Thank you, Ms. Richardson.
I don't see any other questions, so thank you very much for your presentation. And I will now move the council give first reading to borrowing bylaw 2021-29, new fire station construction. I will certainly support this motion. Is there any discussion with respect to the motion? Got to look so many places. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Now to the second borrowing bylaw. The council give first reading to borrowing bylaw amendment 2021-30, water main connection upgrade, Old Canmore Road. Any discussion with respect to that motion? Seeing none, I call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. We'll now have Mr. Como present on G2 2022 utility rate amendments.
Good morning, Mayor Krausert and members of council. Sorry, I was going to do my Dr. Hinshaw impersonation there for a minute. So following the presentations by Ms. Richardson, just to wrap things up for council, there's just 2 outstanding items or I guess 3 that need to be shared with council and get approval. So the first one is the 2022 utility rate amendments. There's the 2 recommendations that council give first, second, and third reading. To the water amending bylaw 2021-27, and similarly first, second, and third reading to the sewer rate amending bylaw 2021-28. So I know a lot of information was shared with council during the finance committee work, so I'm not going to go through as much detail, but just as a quick review, when we do look at the rates annually, we take a look at the operating expenses, we take a look at our capital plans, funding sources, make predictions on our growth assumptions, and then we determine what revenues we need to hit the target balance for the utility, and then it calculates rates as we showed. So, we went through that exercise. What's unique to this year is this will be the first year for the first full year with the EPCOR agreement, so a number of those changes are reflected in there. Through COVID, still the ongoing issue with fluctuations in water consumption and trying to manage that and ensure that we are on top of that. So as I mentioned, the residential is up by 5%. Other than one account type on the commercial side, we are anywhere from 9 to 19% greater than what we had anticipated. So it does make things challenging for administration to to update the rates. It's likely that will continue, but we don't know for sure. And then, as I also mentioned with the Finance Committee work, that the water, on the water side, the reserve balance is quite low, and on the wastewater side, quite high, so we need to try to get some equilibrium there and transition from a 33 to 67% split by 2029 to increase that to a 39 to 61% increase each year. So those are some of the highlights in the model. This is the balance that we had shared with the Finance Committee, so no changes there. And then these are actually the rates that we're looking to, administration is proposing to council that are reflected in the bylaws. And you can see that on the fixed side, the rates increased by 3%. And then on the variable side, again, because of the fluctuations, we're looking at a 0% increase on the variable side. And the impact for the average home that is consuming about 15 cubic meters of water per year, the overall impact with the 3% and the 0 is about a 1.7% increase over the year, or roughly about $11. So not significant. And then on the commercial side, there's quite a few more variables, but on average it's about 1.2 to a 2% increase on the commercial sector. And that is the end of my presentation. There are the recommendations for council, and I can answer any questions if they.
Thank you, Mr. Como. Any questions? You literally blew Councillor Graham away. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. I will now move that council give first reading to the water rate amending bylaw 2021-27. Any discussion? Councillor McCallum.
Thank you. I don't normally speak to these, but I would thought that the unsung work that the utility model does for our community is a thing that we should talk about. Water and waste is really one of those primary important functions that municipalities provide for their communities. And there's a lot of communities in Canada that don't have the quality of water or waste that we do, and have a garbage collection system that, and I know that's a different motion, but that speaks to our goals with regards to wildlife, et cetera. So it's amazing. We go to the tap, we turn it on, and this beautiful mountain juice comes out that's clean and will not make us go to the bathroom too much, and nourishes our bodies. And so I've always appreciated and learned this over time, that the water utility being separate from our regular budget, because in my mind it feels that it's less subject to politics and more subject to what is needed to be done to make sure our water comes to us clean every single day. So with that little TED Talk, I will be happy to support first, second, and third reading of the water rate amending bylaw, as well as the sewer rate amending bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McCallum. Any other discussion on the motion? Councillor Ma?
Yeah, I'm happy to support this, and I just wanted to say those spreadsheets that Mr. Como does to figure out the utility are pretty impressive. I'm also curious to see what's going to happen over this next year, to see if the water capacity usage starts to stabilize, or we get a little bit of a second data point just to understand all that flux that we're dealing with. But happy to support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ma. Any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll now move that council give second reading to the water rate amending bylaw 2021-27. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll now seek leave of council to give third reading to the water rate amending bylaw 2021-27. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And so I will move that council give third reading to the water rate amending bylaw 2021-27. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Now move to the sewer rate amending bylaw. I move that council give first reading to the sewer rate amending bylaw 2021-28. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I move that council give second reading to sewer rate amending bylaw 2021-28. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll seek leave for council to give third reading to the sewer rate amending bylaw 2021-28. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And I'll move that council give third reading to the sewer rate amending bylaw 2021-28. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. And now, Mr. Como, we will now turn to recyclables and waste control bylaw.
Thank you. So similarly, that this is the recommendation for council. They give first, second, third reading to the recyclables and waste disposal fees amending bylaw 2021-2026. A couple of the highlights that are reflected in the rate increases is the utilities looking for an additional 1.5 FTEs for next year, mostly to support the increase in use. So we haven't had a new position in that role since early 2020, and we've seen an increase of about 5,000 tips throughout the entire community per year. So to manage that, as well as what's recently approved, the moving to phase 2 of the food waste program, residential food waste program, and part of that position, or part of those positions are to support that as well. A couple other things that we've highlighted that we didn't have the specific details when we went to the Finance Committee that we wanted to share now. As you'll see that the rates are a little bit different than what we had shared with Council back in the Finance Committee process. So we've also noted that our account growth is much greater than what we anticipated in the value of about $61,000. So it really is what it does is it establishes a new base for which to go forward with. So we'll have those units now and obviously get that compounding benefit going forward. So that's greater than what we had originally projected, anticipated. And like I said in the past, usually the model tries to be conservative, and we just had a number of more units than what we had anticipated. Also, with COVID, people are likely aware that the access and cost of raw materials has grown significantly. And so this market of our recyclable products fluctuates quite a bit, and what's happened over probably the last 5 to 7 years is there's a cost to us. We get very little for it, and sometimes it's actually a cost to the municipality. And so it's much less than getting rid of it as garbage, because we're doing the right thing. We're not throwing it in the garbage, even if it starts to become similar in costs. And so because of the trends in access to these commodities, we've seen plastics and fiber in particular going up significantly. So fiber we used to get about $5, now we're getting considerably more, closer to $100. On the plastic side, we used to pay $100 and now we're getting $5, so it's a net benefit of $105 per ton. So those types of things have increased the utility, or at least what we're projecting for 2021. And again, we're still being conservative, is an additional $50,000. So that $111,000 increase, when we looked at the utility, has been quite beneficial in what we're projecting into the new year, which I'll come back later, will have an impact and an explanation to the change in the rates that we had originally shared with the Finance Committee back in late November. Similarly, the reserve balance this is the same, doesn't look any different. The model actually didn't change. What really did change is the starting point with which we updated the model. So specifically on the residential recycling side, we have a rate of $16.51 However, the rates for 2021 were 17.15. And so what had happened is administration had done an error in the update and started with a 2020 rate instead of a 2021. So that's why it's less. Wasn't the case on the waste side. You can see that's gone up by 3%. And on the commercial side, it is leveled off. So when we look back at the residential side, you can see that there's a very little impact on the households. It's about less than 0.25%. And those rates that we have in there are in the bylaw. It was balanced. And so there's, in our opinion, no need to make any changes and to go back and start with a different rate. If we'd done that, we'd probably do a 0% across the board because of the changes I just spoken to. So everything's balanced. We're probably talking just a couple $1,000s difference to the utility, and the fact that we have it balanced and we're able to pay for all of our 2022 approved capital projects with reserve, we don't believe there's any need to make any changes. But we wanted to highlight the change, how it came about, and obviously it was a learning for us. We do have multiple eyes on it, but this is a step we need to make sure that we start from the right starting point when we do future updates to the model. And that is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Como. Well, that's good news. Thank you for that. Any questions, Mr. Como? Seeing none, thank you very much. So I will move that council give first reading to the Recyclables and Waste Disposal Fees Amending Bylaw 2021-26. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll move that council give second reading to the Recyclables and Waste Disposal Fees Amending Bylaw 2021-26. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. I'll now seek leave of council to give third reading to the Recyclables and Waste Disposal Fees Amending Bylaw 2021-26. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. And I'll move that council give third reading to the Recyclables and Waste Disposal Fees Amending Bylaw 2021-26. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. Thank you. I'm going to call a break, returning at 10:30, after which time we'll go in camera. All right, welcome back. There is only one other item on the agenda, and that's an in-camera discussion around the TSMV statements of claim. And we are not going to be having any other business after that other than adjourning. There'll be no decision made. So after I make the motion to go in camera, and we do so, the live stream will be ended for today. So now I move that we go in camera. All those in favor?